Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to talk about Roger. Roger is a professor of economics at University of California, San Diego. And before that, he was at Princeton, then a member of technical staff at Bell Labs. So I guess that's a precursor to the current wave of economists working for tech companies. And then he was a professor of economics for many years at the University of Michigan before moving to San Diego. And it's at Michigan when I first met him. Well, I was a graduate student. I did my PhD there. And Michigan is the place that was just teeming with public finance research. Joel Schlerman, Jim Hines, and Roger were my committee. And it was hard to imagine a better place to study public finance than that. So Roger was one of my advisors, and every advisor brings different things to the table and has different strengths. My recollection from that time of talking to Roger was that it was a very scary experience. It wasn't scary because Roger was not nice or anything like this. If anything, it's completely to the contrary. But basically, you went there with your ideas, and it was clear, like 30 seconds in, that what we are talking about are things that I haven't yet thought, that are like 5 steps removed from, or 5 steps ahead from what I was able to comprehend up to that point. And like 2 months later, I finally understood that this is where I should have been all along. I've heard similar comments from established economists scared of Roger discussing their papers because they knew that what's coming is insightful and clever analysis of what happened and what should have happened in the paper. A few years after that, I had the pleasure of working with Roger on our one joint project. So I'm not going to discuss that paper. There are many other papers that Roger wrote that are better than the one that we wrote together. But from my point of view, well, first it was an extremely pleasant experience. It gave me an opportunity to go to many dinners with Roger during visits in New York and so on. And I believe it made me a better economist because it forced me to actually understand a lot of things that I didn't understand before and kind of revisit my preconceived notions that were not exactly right. Roger received his PhD from MIT in 1976, and since then he's been working almost exclusively on topics related to tax policy. There were some exceptions to it. Early on, his first paper that was published when he was still a graduate student, it was a note in Econometrica that was entitled Negative Quasi-Definiteness and the Global Stability of General Equilibrium. I think we can forgive him for that. Since then, he's been primarily working on public finance and tax-related topics. And I would say that he's been primarily a theorist, although a lot of his papers have an empirical element or empirical implications to them. But when I say theorist, there are different types of theorists, and Roger does what I would call an extremely policy-relevant theory. It's a theory that's done for policy-oriented reasons to understand how policy looks like and how it should be done. It's always with sort of big important questions in mind and taking seriously realistic economic constraints that shape policy in practice. So if you look at Google Scholar, Roger's most cited paper is a paper on optimal taxation approach to fiscal federalism. So other than being a very seminal contribution to that literature that basically brought attention to the importance of externalities in intergovernmental intergovernmental externalities that follow from local government policy and sort of the role of federal government in kind of internalizing or helping to internalize these things. I think this work features one of the themes that are present throughout many papers in that Roger wrote, and that shaped how I and many other people tend to think about public finance theory, and it's something that I would call positive optimal taxation, meaning thinking about using optimal taxation tools and sort of identifying policy that sort of efficient, optimal, given the assumptions, but instead of necessarily, instead of assuming that this is a prescription for what governments should do, it's sort of what's in the background of all of this is thinking that policy is not always right, but sort of big picture things we are probably more or less getting somewhat right, and if the prescriptions are extremely different than what we observe in practice, then there has to be a reason for it, and it's important to think about that reason, and it's important to incorporate that into theory. So obviously, this one way of doing things like this is to do political economy, and that's what a lot of people do. You sort of think about political constraints and how politics shapes policy, but that's sort of an alternative, and I think it's a very insightful alternative. And a good example, the best example that I can think of that, and the example that, again, if you look at Google Scholar, is probably going to overtake shortly the federalism paper as Roger's most cited work is the work with Whaley on taxation and development that makes a very simple observation that if you look at policies in developing countries and you apply the tools of modern, at least modern as, let's say, of 10, 15 years ago, optimal taxation, those policies look extremely inefficient and they don't make a lot of sense. So what can you do? Well, you could say that there are problems there and they should implement different policies, or you can actually start thinking about why policies look the way they look. And the argument in the paper is that there is the critical role or the critical factor that you should take into account is the role of the financial system. It's the financial system that allows you to tax and observe information. Once you add that piece to the puzzle, and you think about how policy that takes seriously the existence of that administrative constraint should look like, the policies that you observe in many places, maybe they are not the best policies that you could imagine, but you can rationalize a lot of things that you see in practice. So this paper has been extremely influential and seminal paper for a really booming field of tax policy or public finance in developing countries where nowadays a huge amount of research activity is taking place. So Roger's talk today will be about corporate taxation or corporate taxation, but sort of corporate taxation and taxation of capital more generally is probably the area to which Roger has devoted the most attention in his work. So the key issue, and I'm not sure if Roger would agree with that interpretation, but that's how I tend to think about it. The key thing to consider there is various possibilities of income shifting, arbitrage that influence how capital taxation works in practice. So you can sort of take it in different directions. You can think about the international element of all of this, and you can think about corporate versus non-corporate sector. And you can also think about incentives for entrepreneurship. It's sort of, these sound a little bit like, topics that are within the same area but not necessarily closely related, but they are tied through this role of income shifting and arbitrage. The work on international taxation is again, extremely influential and very well known. So an example of that is the paper with Lance Bovenberg in AER in 1996 that proposes an explanation for why capital is not perfectly mobile across countries. Why is that important? Well, that's important because if capital is mobile, then it's extremely difficult to tax capital, and yet we observe corporate and capital taxation in practice. So there is some frictions that must be present, and the explanation that they propose and that's literature rightfully considers as one of the important explanations is the role of asymmetric information, where domestic investors are not necessarily perfectly informed about markets and market opportunities and consequences of investments abroad. In work with Joel Slemrod and Laura Kalambakidis, they take a somewhat different question, but extremely policy-relevant question, and that is if you look at capital taxation in practice, capital taxation is not perfect. There are a lot of opportunities for arbitrage. There are a lot of opportunities for tax avoidance. There are a lot of preferences. So one question that you can ask is how much revenue do you actually collect using capital taxes? And that turns out to be, the answer to that turns out to be surprising. It's sort of, there isn't one answer. The answer changes with the tax system and changes over time. But when they've done this exercise for the first time, looking at the policy in the 1980s, the conclusion was that the US probably could get rid of capital taxation, shift to cash flow taxation, and collect about the same amount of revenue with some distributional consequences, but not extreme consequences. You sort of go fast, you go forward 15 years, the environment has changed, policy has changed, but inflation has moved, the relevance of new versus old investment has changed, and these are the factors that sort of influence how important the capital taxation is in practice. So this is this is a work that's motivated by theory, by policy proposals, but that takes extremely seriously the data and the actual implementation of the policy. So I'll briefly talk about two more strands of Roger's work. So the second to last is the work on corporate income shifting. So that's again work with Joel Slemrod that asks again a provocative question of whether all the responses or most of the responses that we observe in practice are really not real responses to taxation, but rather the consequence of income shifting, and that's the place where this was extremely relevant in the US, was in the aftermath of the Tax Reform Act of 1986, where, as they document, and the literature came to appreciate a big part of the response in the aftermath of that reform was basically changes in the organizational form. And the literature appreciated it because of Roger's work. I still don't think that literature appreciated it enough. I think that we are still kind of learning about these types of responses. That's something that has consequences for thinking about the structure of incomes that we observe and the distribution of incomes and so on. It's also something that, as I think we'll at least hear a little bit today, has consequences right now because the reform in the U.S. that has just taken place again played with the incentives on the same margin. Finally, the work in 2000s mostly, although I don't think exclusively with Julie Cullen, was again looking at a form of capital taxation, but sort of a different angle. Basically, it was work that that looked at tax incentives for entrepreneurship. And once you start thinking about entrepreneurship, and you're not thinking just about self-employed and not just about large firms, there are a lot of things that that you have to take into account. So you have to think about differential taxation of wages and profits, kind of obviously. That's one important factor in deciding whether you want to be an entrepreneur. But you also have to think about the interaction of taxation with risk-taking. You have to think about the role of progressive taxation. You have to think about treatment of losses and so on. So there isn't one simple summary statistic of the tax system that describes how it influences behavior or entrepreneurial activity. There are actually many different forces to consider. So this work is extremely insightful and sort of tells you how to think about it and provides evidence that indicates that the tax policy does have an effect on entrepreneurship. So I lied slightly. There is one other type of work that I haven't mentioned, but I'm not going to talk about papers here. So the work that I haven't mentioned is work on the transition economics. Roger has done a lot of work of that type. What it links to is that Roger likes to travel, and Shelley likes to travel, so they spend a lot of time in a lot of different places over the years. And one of those places was China, and much of that work is about China. I also learned early on that we overlapped in Poland because I was a high school student or just in college, and Roger happened to be there watching the transition as it was occurring. And the final thing I want to say is that I started by saying that Roger is a theorist, but he is also a theorist that takes insights from his work into practice. So the best well-known example, and as far as I know, it's not a secret because so many people know about it, is that once you realize that appreciated capital gains or appreciated assets are taxable, then you should plan. And given the tax environment in the U.S., if you used to have appreciated house and you moved, you have to do something, and the best thing to do was to invest in another house that's big enough. So Roger and Shelley had a huge house in Ann Arbor, and they have a huge house in San Diego, which is a great perk because if you visit San Diego, you have a place to stay. And as far as I understand, a lot of people were benefiting from it. So probably should stop here, but I'm actually grateful for this opportunity to speak about Roger's work, and I cannot imagine a better person to deliver this lecture. And without much further ado, I guess we should hear to Marimba and then to Roger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wojciech, in particular to this very warm invitation to San Diego to go and see Roger. I think that's a great idea. Okay, we are now, I will keep that in mind, we are now coming to the prize ceremony, and I would like to ask you, Wojciech, and Roger to join me. We are doing the prize ceremony and then the music, and then we are ready for your lecture. So I'm supposed to read this to you. The Richard Musgrave Lecture, Visiting Professorship 2019, is awarded jointly by the CESifo Group and the International Institute of Public Finance to Professor Roger Gordon, who will deliver the Richard Musgrave Lecture on the role of the corporate income tax. So congratulations. Thank you. So we do a photo, maybe you come between us. Thank you. And now it's the music, please, Woody.